Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening and this screening of the Babushkas of Chernobyl, hosted by the Dalton Nuclear Institute. For those who are not aware, the Dalton Institute is an umbrella organisation capturing nuclear activities and engagement across the University of Manchester. The Dalton Champions are a group of volunteers from across the university that host events like the one today. This remarkable documentary follows a group of elderly women who chose to return to their homes inside the Chernobyl exclusion zone after the 1986 nuclear disaster. Defying radiation and government orders, they built a life of resilience, humour, and community in one of the most contaminated places on Earth. Their story is a powerful reflection of home, identity, and the strength of human spirit. After the film, we're delighted to be joined by the director, Holly Morris, for a Q&A, where she'll share insights from her time with the Babushkas and the making of the film, and this will be chaired by Richard Taylor, a key figure in the Dalton Nuclear Institute. Finally, a few housekeeping notices. There are no scheduled fire alarms, so if you do hear one, please follow the green signs and go outside to the assembly point. The bathrooms are unfortunately quite a long way away. They are through the back doors, to the right, and then down a set of stairs. And finally, the film runtime is 1 hour and 10 minutes, after which we'll launch straight into the Q&A. It's also important to note that the Q&A will be recorded and posted later on YouTube, so if you don't want to be part of that recording, just move to your right or my left, this side of the theatre, so that you're not captured on camera. So I've got nothing left to say, and please enjoy this screening of The Babushkas of Chernobyl. Gosh, wasn't that an amazing documentary? Well, I'm sure the room is teeming with questions. So it is my pleasure to introduce Holly Morris, the brains behind the operation, and Richard Taylor, our resident expert on the Babushkas of Chernobyl.
Thank you so much for watching the film and taking the time, and I'm excited to speak with you today.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think I can say quite safely that the audience really enjoyed your film. Did you expect to be making a really funny film?
Great question. No, I did not. Going into this film, it was born out of a print piece, an article I wrote for a New York magazine. And once I was there talking with the women who later became the main characters of the film. And of course, it's a nuanced story. I hope that comes through, a very human story, a very nuanced story. And but they were so funny. And I will say I think it's probably the funniest Chernobyl film anyone's ever seen. And it really came from their heart, from their sensibility, and their grip on life.
Brilliant. Well, there are so many questions. I've got whole pages of them here, but so I'll just ask one to get us going, and then we'll put it out to the crowd who gathered to witness the film today.
Okay.
I guess the obvious question is, what was it that inspired you to actually make this film? And supplementary to that, what were the major challenges involved with actually getting it made?
Yeah. So, well, I first came to the story because I was, for many years, I did a program called Globe Trekker, which was actually a UK production, a travel show. And we were there for the 20th anniversary of the accident. And at that time, sort of stumbled across this reality that there were people living inside the Chernobyl exclusion zone, which I didn't know at the time. And, I think wasn't widely known. And then I went back and wrote this. So once I met them, I couldn't get them out of my head, wrote this article for the magazine that I talked about, and then started on the process of making a film, which took a few years, as all documentaries do. Notably, though, this was as you can imagine, a unique production because the exclusion zone has lots of limitations on how many days you can go in, subsequent days you can be in the zone, how many hours every day you can be in the zone. You have to take a certain amount of precaution going in and out while you're filming, and always have someone with you with a Geiger counter, as you saw in the film. so those were limitations, and this film was actually shot over only 18 days in the zone, and we had two different teams filming, so no one team would have too much time in the zone. So if any of you are into film production, you know that's not a very many shooting days for a documentary, but we were aided, I think, in the storytelling sense by the fact that we'd been there before. I'd spent time with the women. I kind of knew them. So a lot of the trust one needs to build up in making a documentary was established. And also I knew kind of what their stories were. And I knew, for example, how funny Hannah was. And so when we came back with cameras, it made the process a little bit easier.
And did the Babushkas actually take direction, or did you sort of just point a camera at them and see what they did?
Oh, these are excellent questions. No. And actually, as you can, they are self-determined women who are not going to sit down for cameras before you eat and drink with them. So that was like Babushkas the world over. I think that is true. And it was true inside the Chernobyl exclusion zone, which, raised the stakes because as you learned in the film, the first rule of being in the zone is not to eat or drink anything locally grown. So we came up with hacks there, and we would bring cakes from Kyiv or alcohol from somewhere else or whatever it may be. So we as a team weren't eating and drinking in the zone, but of course, as you saw, the residents of the zone certainly do.
Yeah, that jam did look delicious, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Really did.
It did. And I also we had a translator / field producer named Marina Orikova, who was just so key to making this film happen because she was a local person who spoke all the dialects, spoke all the languages, and knew all the regional songs and folk traditions. So having someone like that as part of our team for the whole production was just critical. Americans, I certainly couldn't have gone in without a team. And our cinematographer was an American, but he was fluent in Russian. He was this tall, good-looking American guy, and the characters in the film loved him. So it was a team effort.
Yeah. Okay. Well. Thank you for that. It's just a sort of introduction. I'm sure we'll get into other territory, but I'm keen to throw it out to the audience because I'm sure we must have an awful lot of questions. So we have some roving microphones. So please, could you put your hand up if you have a question for Holly, please? Yes, there's one here.
Hello.
Hi.
Pleasure to meet you. I wanted to ask how the Babushkas think about their health in the conversations you had with them, especially like beyond radiation. These are elderly women in a space that don't seem to have a lot of medical care.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there was among most of the people, there was who chose to stay. There was an attitude of that plays into what I think is one of the sort of takeaways of the film, that the question of health becomes more nuanced than one might think going into the story. I mean, I thought going into this, it would be a very different story than it was. But if you remember at the end, the doctor sort of says, describes the situation where the people who were displaced, who moved from their motherland, from the villages they grew up in, the graves of their children and their parents and everything else, to high rises outside Kyiv, had a different kind of negative health impact. And that kind of displacement and separation from your homeland has truly physical and psychological impacts on your health. And so there's the detriment of that. And then the very, weighed up against the very real detriment of nuclear contamination. So to me, so that was a kind of, as a viewer and a director, one of my takeaways. But the women themselves inside the zone, all of whom in this film, all the main characters outlive the sort of typical Ukrainian lifespan, radiation or not. They were sort of like dismissive of the radiation and decided that, in theory, they understood that the food was contaminated and everything else, but they made a choice to stay on their homeland. So yeah, they don't get a lot of health care. End of life is not easy. I can tell you an update because this film is now, it's been roughly a decade since it was made. And we just lost Hannah Zavorotnya, the last surviving babushka in this film, about 2 months ago. So she died at 92, something like that. So but I could go on and on. If you're interested in hearing about what's happened to the other folks, I can let you know. And also, we were filming again with the group we filmed with Hannah again for a follow-up to this film a couple of years ago, just in the wake of the Russians invading the Chernobyl nuclear zone, which is a whole other chapter to the zone's history.
Sure, I guess people are thinking we really would want to hear about everyone else, but maybe we'll come back to that if
Yeah.
the end. And also, you raised an issue about the subjectivity of risk, which I know is one of the themes, and I'd really like to come back to that if we've got time as well, because I think there's lessons to be learned for our nuclear industry about that, and I'd like to get your views on that. But for now, let's have some more questions from the audience. There's one, gosh, there's loads. One here.
Hi, Ollie. Thank you, first of all, making such a beautiful piece of work. I almost fell in love with Babushka. So my question is, whenever the camera frame was on Babushkas, the camera felt very gentle, patient, and calm. So building that intimacy is very important for any cinematic storytelling between camera and the character. So how was your struggle? Was it very natural, or it just happened with Babushkas? Because what we have seen in this documentary, it felt very natural. I felt I was the part of that conversation. So how did that happen?
I think it was a combination of things. All the work I've done in my career has been to tell the story of unlikely heroines around the world, so international women's stories. And I think that the Babushkas fall squarely into that lane. And so part of it has to do with the trust we were able to build in terms of the pattern of our getting to know this story and my being there over a period of a couple of years working in different media. But also it has to do with who they were, mostly in terms of just being warm and sort of our directorial approach of informality and really letting them speak for themselves, going in from the beginning with no intention of narration. I think narration takes the story out of the hands of the narrators who need to be telling it, which in this case was the Babushkas. So, I think that you've probably seen a lot of nuclear stories, right? And this is one you don't see a lot, really driven by humanity and by humor and by the complexity of the human condition and how it all can live together, the suffering, the joy, the humor, the terrible environmental tragedy. So I guess the short answer to it, how did it, so I think it was a combination of who they were and their spirits and I will say their lack of consciousness around cameras. It's very hard to go anywhere in the world right now and talk to anyone, certainly young people, who don't have a pretty formed consciousness about being on camera. Whereas I think this group of women typically didn't, you know. And I will say we went back about a year after the film was finished and did a screening in Hannah's living room with everybody who was involved with the project in the zone. We got a minivan and went from village to village and picked everyone up, and so it was really such a pleasure to watch them watch the film.
Yeah, I can imagine that must have been absolutely wonderful. Do you think the Babushkas felt that they had a story that needed telling, or were they just bemused that you were there?
I think probably the latter more. You know, the first time I was in the zone when I was writing this print piece, I was just outside the zone, and where I was just on the border of the zone, talking with a woman who isn't in the film, and she had a phone, and we just sort of knocked on her door, and when we walked in, beside, you know, right after offering us food and drink and everything, she picked up her phone and called on all the neighbors and said, "Come over. There's interesting people here," you know, because they weren't getting a lot of visitors, and there weren't people asking about their stories, and so there was an element of bemusement, but I also think there was so much, you know, I think they were happy to have their stories told, and they are, well, now they are gone. You know, there's very few people left in the zone, and certainly all the main characters in this film are gone. So I feel very happy that we were able to capture their stories, and you know, forevermore.
Wonderful. Yeah. Can we take another question? Have we got a mic over in the...
We've got one from online. Were there any conversations or saying that were particularly difficult to translate?
Well, literally translate, I assume you mean, and I would give credit to Marina, as I mentioned, who was our translator on the ground. And then we did post-production in Brooklyn, New York, and we had a fleet. This was before, you know, AI could have done it. In fact, I don't think AI could do it. But we had a fleet of...
for everybody.
Say again?
That's a relief for everybody. We wouldn't want to...
Yeah, well, you know, I don't think these dialects are in its brain yet, but we did have a fleet of young women living in Brooklyn who were the daughters and granddaughters of Ukrainians. It was who came in, and because of their parents knew the language and the dialects, and did all this, you know, we did it really sort of analog translation. And it was a really interesting process because it was just so difficult for them because their fathers, it was usually their fathers were no longer living. So it was very emotional for them to be translating the kinds of things they heard from their own grandmothers. And anyway, so that's how we got through the kind of very particular translation, which was having someone terrific on the ground when we filmed, and then in Brooklyn using the kind of future, you know, they're the grandchildren of this generation to help us get the moments. And the other thing that I just wanted to say about translation and language and the warmth of it is that a lot of what I thought were the really beautiful moments in the film, we didn't know we had in real life, because we recorded you know, Hannah when she was doing her chores, just walking around talking to herself and all that stuff. And I didn't know at the time a lot of what was being said, right? So when we got back to Brooklyn and they were all getting translated, we'd hear these incredible, moments like, goodbye brains, see you tomorrow, or, radiation doesn't scare me. Starvation does, these really moments that encapsulate the heart of this story. We were able to get them later because we just ran audio all the time on them, which created a production challenge at home, but it was worth it because it really enabled it the takeaway, I believe, from the film is to really be their story, their words. They drove everything.
Yeah, it's a very lyrical film, isn't it? And it looks so natural, it makes it look easy, and it's interesting to see you describe just how much work is involved in making something look so simple, I guess. Anyway, more questions, please. Put your hands up. Right, there's a couple up here. Oh, someone's coming this way. Yeah, Monique.
Thanks for the beautiful movie. I wanted to ask, did you speak to any of the children or grandchildren of the Babushkas and what their thoughts about their parents or grandparents still living in the exclusion zone? Did they come to visit? Yeah, just a bit more about what their perspectives were.
Yeah. So we did. In fact, we had a sort of a whole character and a set of scenes that didn't make it into the film, which was the daughter of one of the Babushkas, and it's a mixed bag. There are a lot of the children. So when the zone was evacuated, well, everybody was evacuated, but then the older people started sneaking back and, being just removed again and then coming back again. And so eventually the officials at the time just said, oh, let them go home. They'll die, but they'll die happy. And they're old anyway, right? Old being 50s and up. So young people were strictly not allowed to return because, as you all may know, the detrimental effects of radiation impact younger people more. So you'll see, as you see, and to this day in the region, higher levels of cancer, especially thyroid cancer, among even young people today. But at the time, that was the case. So anyway, to more directly answer your question, the lucky residents of the zone have children in Kyiv, say, which is only an hour and a half away or something, who help take care of them and look in on them and come and visit the zone periodically. You're allowed to visit a certain number of times a year and are willing to. And grandchildren can't come in, for example. But I will tell you that the scene, just to give you a little bit of color on the character, the daughter that we didn't include, she lived in Pripyat, and she, as a young person, worked at the power plant, and the Pripyat was totally evacuated, of course, and no one was ever allowed to go back. We did go, except you saw the Stalkers, of course, and their return there. But she visited her mom and had a good relationship. Her mom lived in a village, and then we went back to her apartment where she lived in Pripyat. So where the Stalkers went. So that was quite moving. And we didn't include it in the film because we really wanted it to live with the older generation. But it was quite. There are a lot of people now in their 50s who have very close ties to the region and to the tragedy, and it's a multi-generational trauma that's unfolded. And of course, this is all done before this current war. So there's a lot of generations of trauma and ill health and high rates of alcoholism, et cetera, attached to Chernobyl, I believe.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you. Another question. We've got one right in the middle.
We have one online first, sorry.
Oh.
So we wanted to know about the Stalker footage and how that was obtained for the film.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
Sorry, so there was some footage of actual stalkers in the zone
Oh,
and how
yes.
you obtained that footage.
Yes. The Stalkers, when did I first hear about the Stalkers? I think the first time I was filming there, I heard about this phenomenon of the Stalkers, which again blew my mind. They were the typically young people, typically young boys, many of whom played the video game Stalker, which is apparently huge in that part of the world, who were sneaking in and returning to the area. And on one hand, the Stalkers were like, reckless youth, and you could interpret it that way, and playing with fire around the radiation contamination. And another way, I think they were trying to make sense of this tragedy that wiped out their grandparents' generation. And many of the Stalkers I talked to, yeah, their grandparents were the people cleaning up after the accident, sometimes people working in the plant, sometimes first responders. So they'd directly lost family members, and or had gone to camp, in when as little kids, gone to camp there, summer camp, and return to those spaces. So it's not all kind of a reckless teenage thing. They were, what they're doing is illegal. We built trust with them over time. They lived in Kyiv. Most of the footage you saw in the film was shot by them on their phones. So it was, we acquired it from them. And also some of it, though, although I will say for the record, whenever we met with them, we said, look, this is dangerous. You shouldn't go in the zone. But at one point, I did say, if you're going to go, take this camera with you. And they did do some shooting with a camera that came from us. But yeah, so that's the story. There's also, if you look on Slate magazine, I wrote a pretty in-depth story about the Stalkers and the whole Stalker phenomenon.
It just raised the question that I was thinking about watching the film, which was about sort of victims. I guess when a lot of us started watching it, we thought, well, maybe the Babushkas are going to be the victims of this story. And I just wondered what perspective you had about what it tells us about, who's the victim of the tragedy.
I think the Babushkas are victims. I think the whole region is a victim of this, and I think that the knock-on societal effects, both health and psychological, are pretty well I'm no expert on this, on the nuclear issue, or on the psychological damage of mass environmental contamination. But when you're there and you experience with all the people, there's a very deep sense of fatalism, and I really felt it with the Stalkers more than the Babushkas, but the younger people in the region all felt like we're screwed no matter what. This was before the war. We're screwed no matter what. So it doesn't matter if we risk our health around radiation or alcohol or drinking or eating mushrooms that have been are growing in areas that are, most of us would probably choose not to eat because it's clearly contaminated, and mushrooms hold a very high level of contamination. So I would say that there are generations of victims out of this, and And, but the babushkas, funnily enough, being the ones who stayed home, seemed to be, didn't identify as victims as much, and were just more contented. I mean, that's a generalization, obviously, but it's what I observed.
Yeah, and one of the fascinations of watching the film, I think, at least for me. Another question, please. One here. Someone's desperate to ask a question in the middle.
Hi, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here, and I'm here with my family, so it's a real honor. So I was wondering why mostly women, why they just maintained their
Yeah.
belief, why they came back.
Well, so early on, there were more men, dadushkas. Though as time went on, we were there, 25, 30 years after the accident. And like most places in the world, and including Ukraine specifically, women have a longer lifespan. The men of the region were more often the first responders to the accident and had higher levels of contamination, higher levels of alcoholism, of other sort of comorbidities, I guess would be the word. So, as Hannah says in the film, there's what did she say that was so funny? There's one Dadushka, but he's boring or something like that, or he can't dance or
Useless.
something like that.
The useless men.
Useless, I think the word.
He's useless, yeah. So, so in the end, what emerged was really a community largely of women, and they really took care of each other till the end, as best they could. And as for like why we focus, and my as I said, my interest is I mean, I've seen a few things about people in the zone, over the years they've been interviewed, and it's the way the world goes. It's typically, there'll be one dadushka and 100 babushkas, and they're talking to the guy. So that part of it was my lens, like really wanting to center women's stories, and outspoken grandmothers are not typically the narrators of any media. So it's time to put them forward.
Very good. Another question, please. There's one over here. Anyone with a mic? Oh, yes.
So one of the questions that was asked was related to who the victims were in the film. So this inspired me to ask you whether it was released in 2015, which was approximately a year after the beginning of the war and the annexation of Crimea. So I was wondering if it was from the very beginning your objective to make the film almost politically neutral, or at least more focused on the more individual stories rather than like taking a more political lens, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. So yes. Well, I thought it would be kind of a more heavy-handed nuclear story going in that it ended up being. And I do think it's political in its own way. But yes, not taking on the regional politics. And the Crimea had been taken around that time, but the current war hadn't, in its current iteration, hadn't happened, and we were several years off from the Russians invading the zone, which happened 3 years ago, at the very beginning of this war, and they actually took over the plant and held the. I'm sorry if you guys know all this, but I think it's fascinating. They held the personnel. There's still a number of personnel that have to work at the plant to maintain its safety and keep everything in order. And they took them hostage, the Russian soldiers did, and held them for something like 10, 12 days. And then there was this idea that Putin was going to use the plant and maybe other nuclear plants as, as weapons in this whole operation. So it was a scary few weeks, few months, still is. Though, and I say all this because we did go back and film with them around that time with Hannah and a couple of the other people. And we haven't released that yet. And it's very difficult to, as a filmmaker, so, the story, the political story is not evergreen. And I really wanted this to be an evergreen story of these amazing women and this time and their remarkable strength and resilience. And they wouldn't say bravery, but I'd say bravery. So sorry, again, I'm not answering it directly, but yeah, I wasn't trying to capture the politics of the region or the governmental politics. I tend to stay away from being on the nose about that kind of stuff in the films and stories I do, trying to lead with the lens of individuals and tell the political story in a more in a sort of a subtler way.
Okay, and I guess that's what will make the film timeless, won't it? Because it won't date as if it'd been more overtly political. I'm going to ask a question because I've been dying to get this question in, and then we'll go back. You may not consider this fair, but I'm going to ask it anyway. We teach your film. We show it to some of our PhD students as part of a training program we do called Nuclear and Social Practice, where we look at the sort of broader social issues. And we show you, we pay for it, we don't just show it off Badminton. We do pay for it. But I just wondered I know we talk a lot about a self-determined life and how important that is. And one of the things we talk to our students about is about having a self-determined life as a researcher, which we believe is really important. But what sort of message, what takeaway would you be giving our students from your film? Saying you've seen this film, you're going to have a career in the nuclear industry. This is what you need to take away from it.
How did you preface this by saying it would be an unfair question or a hard?
Well, I guess it's fair, but I thought
Oh,
it's a question I've been wrestling with, so it didn't seem very fair to give it to you straight off the bat.
you mean like, okay, so this is the world you're going to live in, and how do you run your career while taking care of your, I don't know if it's an unfair question, but it's a hard question. I mean, I can tell you that in terms of safety issues and when you put yourself in the middle of a story or research and there's safety issues and there's controversy and all these things, I think it's hard. And I think that you're often cutting a path of self-determination where you're getting told no a lot, and you have to decide whether you want to keep fighting to push your. I'm thinking of storytelling in particular. This film. I just made another film about a group of women from the Arab world in the West who teamed up to ski to the North Pole. So it was political, it was multicultural, it was like had environment at the center of it, the way nuclear energy is at the center of this one. But it was, again, couched in the story of the women who were at the center of the story. So I don't have a good answer to your question, except that if you're gonna, cut a new jib, is that the expression, and live a self-determined life, whether it's in storytelling or film or research or just going to places that people think you shouldn't go, you just have to really, I think, love the people you're doing it with and doing it about. I mean, I know that's a weird question. I don't know much about research, but in terms of the film and storytelling, I had to be in love with those babushkas to spend the years and the energy and the professional capital to come to see this project through. And I'd imagine, and to really care about the issue at the heart of it. And I'd imagine that's the same with research and science and whoever you're in the trenches with out doing the research. Same thing. The people I made these films with are the people I'm closest to, because obviously we're voluntarily doing this and sometimes putting ourselves at risk. And the people we're capturing are not. They're often the victims of one thing or another. But they become the most important people in your life. And so I guess I would say, if that's how you think about your work, I mean, that just should be a factor. How do you want to spend your years and who do you want to spend them with? To me is a lot about what your self-determined life looks like.
Oh, that's so brilliant. Thank you for that. We've got a lot of researchers in the audience, I think, and if they're not inspired by that, then they're not going to be inspired by anything, I don't think. Anyway, we've got perhaps time for a couple more questions, I think. There's one down here at the bottom.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, you touched on it a bit just now, but you clearly had a lot of love for these women and they were very respected in this film. And I wanted to know how you sort of manage the impulse for like truth telling as an investigative journalist and a documentarian and telling a story thoroughly, and also respecting the person before you. Like there are moments where the women get upset when they're talking about what's happened at the power plant. There's moments where they're talking about some absolute horrors from like the Stalinist regime and stuff like that, and even talking about their husbands not being very nice to them. How did you and your team handle knowing when to sort of, do you step away when they get upset? Do you give them a moment, or do you sort of push forward, or is there something in between?
I would not step away unless I was asked to. And if any, there were cases, not actually with this film, but in other projects where people say, for one reason or another, please don't use that. Or, I'm now dealing with that a lot. I'm now running an organization for a leadership organization for young Palestinian and Israeli women. So it's been quite a couple of years, and I am working on a film about that. But in this case, there's lots of politics, that their safety really is at issue. And so, of course, absolutely, cameras go off or cameras never go on. And with that set of characters, in the Babushkas film, it didn't come up a whole lot. I would say that in the moment, some of that I didn't know, like if there was as a storyteller, if someone tells an emotional story and is crying and is talking about what happened, this tragedy that happened 30 plus years ago, I mean, that's the heart of the story. So they wanted us to know that story. So there wasn't a sense of us kind of leading them down a path they didn't want to go on. They will talk as we often joke that the challenge with the babushkas became getting them to stop talking, not getting them to talk more. So this kind of filter that some of us might have, when talking about our pain, it wasn't there for them. They wanted us to know their pain. So now, of course, if we got back to the edit room, and we found things that were said that in this film, I can't think of a single instance, but some films where people said something that I could tell they didn't really mean, or it came out wrong, or it made them look bad, or something like that. I just wouldn't use it. That would be part of my editorial lens. But yeah, by and large with this film, in every case, what they suffered through after World War I in some cases, or World War II, and Chernobyl, they wanted their stories told. And they were all very conscious that they were at the end of their lives. And this was an opportunity to get their stories out.
Well, it certainly did that. I believe we've probably got time for maybe just one more question. There's someone right at the back there. Just
Hello. I was wondering what happens with when you make a film like that, you probably have a lot of, well, outtakes or footage that isn't used. Is any of it archived just like for the future, or does it all just, what happens to the footage that isn't used in the film?
Yeah. So yes, there are a lot of interviews not used. I will say that just to reference something I said at the top, this film, maybe we had 120 hours of footage, which isn't a lot, or at the top, at the high end. So we do have a lot of interviews with a lot of women who are, for example, not even in the film. And yeah, I think so. And we have them, and I own them. But no, I haven't thought about what to do with them. I mean, maybe they belong in an archive. There is a Chernobyl, really great Chernobyl museum in Kyiv. Maybe they belong in that archive, those interviews. And the transcriptions, it's a good question. We don't have an excessive amount of like great outtakes from the film just because we had to use all the good stuff we had because we didn't have a huge amount. But we do have a lot of stories that just simply didn't make it in there and should be preserved somewhere.
okay, thank you so much. I think we're just about time up. All that it remains for me to say, I think, is, well, say thank you to our audience for asking some really good questions. Thank you, Holly, for answering them so honestly and thoughtfully for us. And thank you also for making such a wonderful movie. I think I can speak for everyone here that everyone, you can just tell, can't you? They enjoyed it. They laughed in the right places. They cried in the right places. And it was a wonderful, complex, thought-provoking, uplifting, I thought, an uplifting tale that's going to send everyone away really thinking about not just they've seen a good film, but what it means for them and their life in this nuclear industry and self-determination and how they think about risk and everything else. So thank you so much for that and for sparing the time to talk to us. And a huge tumultuous round of applause, please.
Thank you for having me and for so thoughtfully watching the film and talking with me. And I'm just so glad that to be with you here today.
Brilliant. Thank you again. Thank you so much.